I'd like to call this meeting to order. Good afternoon. Welcome to your Innovation, Technology, and General Services Committee. I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilmember Mike Bonin and Councilmember Mitch O'Farrell. And we'll get started today. Mr. Villanueva, are there any general public comment cards?
We don't have any, sir.
Okay, general public comment is closed. Are there cards on items 2 through 7?
None, sir.
Okay, then comment on those items are closed. Today we have what I think is an important item on item number 1. Items number 2 through 7 I think can be approved on consent if my colleagues are so willing.
Sure. No objection.
Yeah, mostly administrative and asking for certain reports and clearing up some of the backlog on things. So without objection, items 2 through 7 are approved on consent. So that brings us to the, I guess there's some people in the room we're here for items 2 through 7. So you guys are happy to leave. Feel free to leave. So it brings us to item 1, the joint CAO-ITA report and RFP for CityLink LA. I'm very excited about this item coming forward today. I think it's a major milestone in the CityLink LA project. For me, it's a big piece of the vision of trying to make Los Angeles the most connected city in America, ideally in the world. This is a proposal to help move us forward in that regard. It's an initiative to bring affordable high-speed Wi-Fi and wired broadband to residents and businesses throughout Los Angeles. Our CityLink team has been working for nearly 2 years to get us to this point. The council was good enough to move my motion forward really was one of the first things I brought forward as a council member to try to get this process moving. And it's been a long road, but a good one, because we've really honed in on making this a really good proposal. A lot's been done. We released, just to remind folks, we released a formal request for information back last summer as an interim step, so we really could better understand what the community wanted and what some of the potential bidders would be interested in, the pros and the cons. We have an online community and a business survey. We've worked with general managers from every city department, have forged great partnerships with many of them, and including various resolutions of support from the Board of Rec and Parks, DWP. Even the MTA has said they're interested in partnering with CityLink LA. We've held virtual and in-person focus groups with industry experts to talk about the best practices. We're partnering with community-based organizations throughout the city to act as CityLink ambassadors. So while the release of this RFP, is not a ribbon cutting, it's something where there has been a tremendous amount of work that's been put in to get us to this point, and of constantly going through the process, making it better. Everyone involved has done their due diligence to ensure that we're really moving our best foot forward. Now, one of the main reasons for me to help get CityLink started is because I know that the internet, having fast, reliable internet access is essential. It provides access to educational opportunities, job opportunities, business, economic growth, and at this point, without it, you're at a severe disadvantage. In Los Angeles, we see this play out in a number of ways. 30% of Angelinos and 35% of students don't even have access to the internet in their home. And while the libraries have done a great job of providing free computer labs, they still close at a certain hour, and they're still limited in the impact and the reach that they can have. So should students have to choose between playing a sport or doing their homework because there isn't time to do both? Can a working high schooler not apply to college because the computer lab is closed and their shift is over? These are all some of the things that can be addressed ultimately when this RFP is answered. Globally and nationally, Los Angeles has been in some ways at an economic disadvantage. Our businesses pay more for slower speeds than other places like Chattanooga, Kansas City, and countries like Switzerland, Finland, and Thailand, or Taiwan. In areas where entrepreneurial and creative spirits run high, Los Angeles startups and small businesses should be able to access gigabit service speed broadband at a reasonable rate. If we don't have that, we're not a competitive city. We've lost businesses in the past. We don't want to do that. We want to be a magnet for businesses, for the high-tech industry, but for all businesses of the future that are going to rely on having this kind of high-tech, this kind of virtual infrastructure. So the vision is not just to build the virtual infrastructure for Los Angeles today, but rather to create an incentive to build out the virtual infrastructure for tomorrow. Even now, I don't consider broadband to be a luxury. It's critical to address the disparities of internet availability. In the absence of a national plan to ensure universal service, similar to what our electricity and telephone services were, the city of Los Angeles needs to step up. And that's what is all about today. So before I turn this over to the staff to give the committee an overview of the report and the RFP, I want to say a couple of thank yous for folks. Starting with Ted Ross and Laura Ito of ITA. You guys have been doing amazing work, and Steve Reneker, prior to you doing the hard work. Claudia Aguilar of CAO, Laura Leitner and Mike Dundas of the City Attorney's Office, Peter Marks of the Mayor's Office, Mandana Katabishidi, I always mispronounce your last name, I apologize, of the CLA, outside counsel Joe Van Eaton, Seth Merwitz, Gail Karish, as well as our industry-based and community-based working participants. So, these are just some of the names, and some of you are in the room, some of you are hearing my voice, that have spent countless hours getting us to where we are. And regardless of what, we're going to move this forward, but regardless of what happens, I want to just take a moment to appreciate all of that hard work. Without all of those folks, CityLink would not be at the point where it is today. Mr. Ross, Mr. Seha, would you please walk us through the proposal, unless either of my colleagues have an opening comment. Otherwise, we'll go straight into the proposal.
Ben Seha with the City Administrative Officer, and it's very fitting that you provided such a detailed background because you've been a leader in this project from day one as well. So I know you gave thanks to staff, and that's really appreciative, but also, you've been the leader moving this to where it is today. So I wanted to make sure that you were recognized as well, Mr. Chair. You have provided a very detailed background, which leads me to just focus on what we're asking the committee to approve today, and that's the joint report with the Information Technology Office, Information Technology Agency, where we're asking for a couple of recommendations be moved forward to full council. The first being that ITA be authorized to release the request for proposals, which is attached to the report, and also be the lead with regards to the entire request for proposals process. The second is that the CAO be designated as the lead negotiator for what we hope will be a contract or multiple contracts with vendors that respond to the RFP and meet the requirements the city has set forth. Other than that, there's a couple other more technical recommendations we're asking for with regard to some considerations stemming from waivers that we would like the council to consider. One of those being the local business preference program. We're asking that a waiver be granted for that specific program to allow for a greater field of interest, perhaps not necessarily limit the scope of who would be interested to local businesses, but to a wider audience nationwide and even worldwide. And we're also asking for a delay as far as affirmative action plan submission. Typically, they're submitted along with the RFP proposals that come in. We're asking that it be requested and required for those to be submitted upon execution of the contract. So it would be done in conjunction with the negotiations being made between the city and the vendors that are being considered for award. With that said, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ted Ross, who could go into a little bit more details about what's actually in the RFP, what we're asking for, and why we may be asking for some of these items.
Thank you. Ted Ross, Interim General Manager for the Information Technology Agency. As some of you likely know, years ago I left the private sector to join the City of Los Angeles, and one of the main reasons I believed in the benefits and the public good that government could deliver to its citizens and to its businesses. I can't think of any project that has the scale of a project like this to deliver as much public good to so many at the City of Los Angeles. So I'd like to say this is one of those items that reminds me why I came to work for the city. As championed by Chairman Blumenfield, his fellow council members, and our Mayor Eric Garcetti, CityLink LA, as was described, is a city-led initiative to bring world-class high-speed internet to our residents and to our businesses. For this reason, CityLink LA has the following goals. It's to ensure that every Angelino can access high-speed, high-quality internet indoors or outdoors. To eliminate barriers to access in underserved areas so we can help bridge the digital divide. To deliver open access to ensure no one is prevented from taking full advantage of the power and the capability of the internet. And to ensure that every Angelino can enjoy the benefits of broadband internet access regardless of income or where they live. So to summarize some of the aspects that's shown in the RFP, as you can see in the CAO and Joint ITA report, through CityLink LA, we encourage the rapid deployment of vendor broadband networks that further these goals. This will be done through Wi-Fi and wireline capabilities, so both some devices that have a wire and those that are getting it through Wi-Fi, offering both a high-speed paid service and a no-cost basic service. Hearing the feedback from vendors that was mentioned by the councilman and by Ben through the request for information, both the vendors and the community, we included the following direct support to the initiative. So these are items that are identified in the report as the direct city support section. Number one, to establish a digital infrastructure permitting group. Comprised of staff from up to 11 city departments, the permitting group will serve as a single point of contact and to help expedite the permitting for these large technology infrastructure projects. Secondly, the use of identified city property assets for the selected proposals. Once again, a second item that directly responds to the information we heard through the RFI. The city has identified more than 100 properties where fiber hubs or central offices could be placed. These properties are spread throughout the city and would be offered to selected proposers for a rate as low as $3 per square foot. Thirdly, the lease of existing Department of Water and Power fiber at a bulk rate. Fourth, lease access to the city's stormwater drainage system for fiber installation, which becomes particularly useful when trying to cross freeways. Fifth, access to city streetlights at favorable bulk rates for placement of Wi-Fi devices. The successful conclusion of a process like this requires a designated negotiator. The working group that was described by Councilman Blumenfield proposes that the CAO serve as our lead negotiator to negotiate the best contracts that support the goals of the CityLink LA initiative. So as you saw from what we've itemized, this is not a request for the city to invest a large amount of money to build out its own infrastructure and have to maintain it. Due to the size of this project, it is facilitating a vendor bill-out and offering items to induce or entice vendors to deliver this type of network. Due to the sheer size of Los Angeles, the RFP divides the city into 4 quadrants. Proposers may submit a proposal for 1 or more quadrants, with bonus points awarded per full quadrant. The RFP will be evaluated on 2 levels. First of all, there'll be a financial, technical, and legal capabilities, that's pass or fail. And the second would be evaluation panel, in which we look at adequacy of solution and soundness of approach, digital inclusion and how they propose on that, capabilities of the organization who's proposing, their implementation plan, and the bonuses for full quadrant services. Winning proposers would be those that best satisfy the goals of CityLink LA. I'd also like to thank, as was mentioned by the councilman, CityLink LA partners. The Department of Water and Power on May 5th, the Board of Water and Power Commissioners considered and approved a resolution to support CityLink. It had specific items listed to support the RFP. The MTA, Metropolitan Transportation Authority, on April 16, 2015, their Executive Management Committee authorized participation in the CityLink RFP and since then has added some property assets themselves. The Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles, HACLA, has also offered property. So this is a city-led initiative that's bringing in regional support and regional participation. I'll certainly, I did my best to try to summarize a very long and lengthy and complex project. I would like to offer the floor back to Ben to add any additional comments and confirm anything else regarding the recommendations.
So just as a reminder, as you may recall, we just went through the budget process for the next fiscal year. There is $1 million in the unappropriated balance for the digital infrastructure permitting group. So this group has not officially been established yet. It's something that we would have to return to council with the resolution positions or whatever other positions would be deemed necessary for establishment of this group. And that could be done with the UB, the dollars in the UB within the fiscal year, upcoming fiscal year, and then obviously plan for any future fiscal years as part of the budget process.
for any questions.
I'll start with some questions and turn it over to my colleagues and then come back with some more questions.
Sure.
Wireless or fiber access has been tried in other cities, some successfully, some not successfully. Could you tell us a little bit about how and why this proposal is different than what we've seen in other cities?
Certainly. Some cities have done municipal broadband projects in which they either paid for it fully or they invested heavily to build and support and maintain the broadband network infrastructure. Others would do, let's say, a very limited partnership in which a selected group of residents were allowed to get high-speed or no-cost internet access. Certainly something that's different regarding CityLink LA is we listened to our vendor and our community and our citizen community, and we identified what would entice them to come out and build. So, like I said, the key aspects that were involved were the use at a reduced rate for city assets, as well as the ability to have expedited permitting. And our intent is to be able to deliver to every citizen and business in the city of Los Angeles both the high-speed option as well as the basic no-cost option, and to do it through a vendor build-out in which we support and entice them to deliver it in the city of Los Angeles.
So some of the problems other cities have had where they've had legacy hardware sitting on their light posts and
Correct.
Or investments that didn't pan out. In some ways, we're trying to protect ourselves from those types of things.
Correct, so that we don't have a large price tag 5 to 7 years out that the city would be unable to do. CityLink is not that.
No, I mean, it's a unique public-private partnership I don't think we've seen, and obviously it was a leading question, but that we've seen in any other proposal across the nation in terms of how to go about doing this. So
I would agree, and we've already been receiving requests from several large cities to get a better understanding of it.
yeah, so this may be the new model. What's the estimated investment that a CityLink bidder would be putting into this project if they were to serve the entire city?
So certainly it depends on the model chosen by the vendor, but if a vendor were to deliver a service to all of the city and they were serving every customer, we're looking at a $3 to $5 billion investment.
$3 to $5 billion. How are we asking the respondents to address the changing needs for the future CityLink residents?
So certainly a system like this is only good if it delivers value into the future. Our RFP explicitly requests a quote-unquote future-proofing feedback from the vendor in which every proposer would identify how they're going to keep up with changing trends and how they would be able to provide accessibility into the future.
So it's important for folks to realize, especially on the free component, that it may, one of the concerns I've heard with other proposals in other cities is that, yeah, you get free service this year, but next year that's so slow it's not worth anything. But ours, in this one, it would be chained so that it would increase with time.
We want a very robust initiative that is also sustainable.
Net neutrality it's a big issue across the nation. It's something that's baked into this proposal. Could you explain how this RFP addresses net neutrality?
Certainly. So for those who aren't familiar, net neutrality is the concept that internet service providers and government should treat all data on the internet equally. So you shouldn't be discriminating by user or by region or by method of communication or by content. Our RFP requests proposers to describe their commitments to net neutrality as part of their submission.
Okay. I have a number of other questions, but I want to keep it interactive, so I'll turn it over to Mr. Bonin.
Thank you. Well, first thing I wanted to say, Ben sort of anticipated. I wanted to thank you, Mr. Chair, for your leadership on this. We have come a long way in a short time, and if we do this, we're going to do something, as you noted and as Ben and Ted noted, that is really phenomenal for the people of Los Angeles. It's going to provide a great service in all parts of the city. It'll help close the digital divide. And I just wanted to compliment you on the job you've done on this. You were the right guy to lead this initiative, and you've done an absolutely phenomenal job. I'm really proud of the work you've done on this. And I'm happy to support. Did have some questions, though. Some of them are a little medium level, and some are in the weeds. First of all, I wanted to ask about the two exceptions that you were asking for from city policy. First of all, the one that sounds on its face most problematic to me. Why the different approach towards the affirmative action certification?
Well, on the affirmative action certification, it's typically the requirement that anybody that's interested in submitting a proposal submit their certification as part of that proposal. So it's in our hands even before we weigh the proposals and evaluate them. All we're asking in this case is that proposals or prospective proposals be allowed to hold off on submitting that until we actually have entered into discussions with potential vendors for award.
Why?
I think it's one of the feedbacks that we received as we mentioned. We issued our request for information from potential bidders just to see what they would want to see in a request for proposals. We heard back about the need for a permitting group. We heard back about the need for space for our hubs. The other thing we heard back was our bureaucratic processes and the need for the city to perhaps look at its processes and see what we can do on our end to help facilitate a smooth contracting period and a smooth from release of the RFP to award of a contract, a timely process.
So the potential vendors don't want to have to do it up front. Why, though? What's the benefit
I
to
think this is Ted Ross. I think another one of the reasons is that we're unsure exactly how the vendor proposal will come through. So it's a broad ask that they could come in from multiple different directions on exactly how they would build it out. So I think the expectation right now would be able to try to draw a wider net and have those discussions before we would negotiate a contract, so that we'd be very, very clear understanding of what they're proposing and how they're proposing it.
I'm uncomfortable because it just seems like a bad precedent to be setting, but I'm also uncomfortable on sort of an efficiency line of thinking. If we award to someone and then they don't have to present the evidence of affirmative action compliance until the very last minute, then if they don't or they can't, aren't we screwed and don't we have to go back to the drawing board?
If just to add on to your question, it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that none of you're talking about pre-awarding the contract. No one would be awarded anything
That's right.
until they met all of our affirmative action requirements. I want to make sure that that's the case.
That's correct.
That you're only talking about gathering the paperwork in terms of submittal, but before we were to ever award or even negotiate, or once we start negotiating, that's when they have to meet all of our requirements.
And just to clarify, when I mentioned negotiating does not mean a contract has been awarded. We could enter negotiations with multiple vendors, and then upon our understanding of what the potential terms would be, then recommend an award for any number of vendors, and then that would still have to come to the city council for approval. But you're correct. We would not make a recommendation for an award of a contract without all the requirements being fulfilled.
And is that explicit in the exemption? If not, we can make it explicit that nothing be awarded prior to. That's. Did you wanted to add to that, or?
Only if you have further questions. Laurel Leitner from the City Attorney's Office. One of the issues that we think is possibly out there is we may have proposers from other countries proposing who may not be familiar with our practices, and our rules may apply to them differently. And so what the hope is that when we see who submits a proposal and what that proposal actually entails, is that we would go over each one ordinance by ordinance and see whether and to what extent everything is triggered. Because it's explicit in the code that affirmative action forms be submitted with the bids or proposals, that's why it was thought that maybe we should ask for a change for that, have the submission occur later, and then we could work with the proposers to see how to help them comply.
Let me just get some clarity then on when it would be required to be submitted. I'm thinking in terms of contracts I'm most familiar with, which are at the airport, where someone will be bidding on something, and there'll be an RFP out, and they'll be scoring the RFP, and some folks will get a higher score on maybe Weeby than someone else, and that will affect who BOAC will recommend as the awardee. is the evidence of affirmative action compliance going to be certified before someone is selected, or is it going to be, we will select this person and then there will be a, 6-9 month period during which the contract is negotiated, and it has to be submitted during that contract negotiation period?
It was our thought that it would be during that contract negotiation period, but before the contracts were returned to council for approval.
So, if we go through the whole RFP process and we select company A, and we're then halfway through the contract negotiation, and we discover that they can't meet the requirements because they're an overseas company and they just can't. Then don't we have to go back to the drawing board, or do we get to pick option B?
It is we plan to negotiate with as many responders as possible. So we're not going to necessarily end up in exactly the same position that you would in a regular RFP process where you just select the highest proposer. One of the things that we're hoping to do is, as a result of the proposers conference, let me back up. We have included all of the possible ordinances and laws that may apply to a particular proposer or set of proposers, depending upon what the proposal actually looks like. It's our hope to tease out any of these issues during the mandatory proposers conference so that we can begin to talk to them about specifically how they're organized and what they would plan to do. And then the Bureau of Contract Administration has agreed to work with individual respondents to walk them through all of the ordinances. And this is all pre-proposal, so that in the event that a situation arises like you're talking about, it's our hope that we would identify that long before proposals were submitted and then try to address that during that period of time.
I get it. I've worked for the city long enough, though, that I believe that Murphy's Law always sort of applies itself.
It does.
So under the scenario I was outlining where, say, we pick some company, we're a good ways through the contracting process, and we realize that they're not going to be able to meet this requirement, then do we have to start the RFP over, or can we negotiate the contract with someone else who responded to the RFP?
Yes, we can definitely negotiate with someone else, and it's our anticipation that we would be negotiating with very many of them anyway. So the fact that one proposer falls out because of the proposal design and an inability to comply with or meet the standards set by our ordinances would not scuttle the RFP.
Okay.
And just to add to that, we all are talking about an RFP, which usually stands for request for proposal.
Right.
In this particular case, it says request for participants.
Yeah.
And the reason being, I think, is relevant to this discussion, which is we're asking for all comers, and anyone who can meet all of our requirements, we want to invite them to be a partner with us. So it's my hope that if we do end up in Murphy's Law with that situation where we find there's an actor out there who is good in every way, but they're not going to meet our affirmative action requirements, we don't want them, we don't have to go back to the drawing board because we have 10 other groups that may or may not also be able to do it. Now, if none of them can do it, then we've lost out. We have nobody. But going back, we don't have to relet the proposal because anybody who qualifies becomes a partner or reaches the threshold that we think can provide most of what we've asked for.
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask about LAX. Earlier this morning in TCT, we were approving the Board of Airport Commissioners contract with Boingo to extend by 7 years their Wi-Fi contract at the airport. Will Wi-Fi also be available at the airport through this program?
So a vendor would be able to compete, but technically it is on LAWA's property, and my understanding, and then I'll make sure to confirm, but my understanding is that LAX would not be participating in CityLink LA initiative.
Okay. So you've drawn the city up into 4 quadrants. What was the thinking behind doing quadrants?
It was intended to map to the 7 area planning commissions with a couple of exceptions. And so the city is a very large organization, and we knew that a vendor who should be able to compete for the entire organization would be a very large ask. So to try to improve the quality of service and to try to balance out high-tech companies across the city to ensure we didn't get cherry picking, we split it up according to those 7 area planning commissions and converted it into 4.
And the balance of the high-tech explains why it's not, the lines don't match up the West LA Area Planning Commission.
Yes, and so I've got a nice board here, so if you don't mind showing it. Yes, to your point, one of the few exceptions is what is quote-unquote called Silicon Beach being included as part of the South LA district because of its geography and as well as ensuring that every district has both a high-tech component as well as your classic citizen component.
Yeah, I saw that. I had concerns, but I understand the rationale behind it. Having Venice and Google and Playa Vista in with Watts makes it a lot easier to get Watts covered and close the digital divide. Totally cool. I couldn't tell from that map. Do you have a better version of that map? I can't tell exactly where some of the boundaries within my district are. And, for instance, the boundary between what looks to be Mar Vista and Venice, I can't tell if that is Walgrove, which is the boundary, or if it's Centinela, which is right through the middle of a community, which wouldn't be the way to go.
I could not tell you myself just offhand, but that is information we can certainly provide. It is information that we got through our existing GIS application, so it certainly does map and should layer to the zoning area there.
I also can't tell because of where the 90 freeway symbol is.
It's a large symbol on a small map.
What part of Playa Vista is actually in West LA and what is in South? Because I don't know that I would divide Playa Vista in two. I think that being a big part of Silicon Beach, there's Playa Vista proper, and then there's Playa Vista practical, and the proper would be would not include, say, Microsoft in it, which is just north of Jefferson, but you might want to include in it. So if we could just have a discussion about where those precise boundaries are. I don't want to upend the apple cart, but maybe at council we could just modify them just to make sure they make sense. I just don't want to do anything that would be problematic. And part of, maybe I don't care about what I just said.
But one thing worth mentioning, not to interrupt, so even with council's approval, we would have an RFP released truly on June 23rd, so there's certainly an opportunity to make the basic adjustments associated with that. Good.
So there may be a way in which I care less about what I just said, and it depends on how you answer this question.
Okay. I'll really think about the answer.
If the boundary between the two quadrants were the space between you and Ben were in quadrant A and you were in quadrant B, are either of you able to receive a Wi-Fi signal from either quadrant? I mean, where does it drop off? And I mean, is there overlap or is there a dead zone?
So it's really going to depend on how the vendor builds it out. So there's potentially bleed over, but it really comes down to how the vendor designs and builds that area. So, a line, we'll think of me and Ben as a distance, but there's going to be a lot of me and Ben's along any boundary. So it's going to really come down to their design. Quite often there's going to be based off of street lamps or street lights, and so those will often be where the Wi-Fi will be attached. And so I think it's going to depend on the range from the street lamps or street lights.
I mean, part of the reason I ask is, depending on where one of those boundaries are, it could be right in the middle of the Great Street in CD11. And I want to make sure that that the company that serves Ben's area and the company that serves your area don't have sort of a fade-out dead zone in the middle of that street where, his closest signal is several blocks this way, your closest signal is several blocks that way, and both of you at the corner of Venice and Centinela, the heart of it, aren't getting much of a signal.
For them to cover a quadrant, they would cover the entire quadrant. And so likely there would actually be bleed over as opposed to a dead zone.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I would agree with I think what we're all saying, which is we'd rather have a proposal where when you cover a quadrant, you have to cover it fully, and we certainly anticipate and welcome bleed over. There's nothing wrong with providing too much coverage. just making sure that nobody tries to get too cute and go right to the line. And I would think that would be in their incentive. They want to cover the maximum area anyway. But I think that's an important point for all of us to figure out as this goes forward.
All right, so if you could get me those precise boundaries, that would be cool.
Absolutely.
And just a last question. I'm not sure if this is something people would want or not, but in the West Quadrant, you've got a lot of open space there. You've got the Santa Monica Mountains. Are they going to be doing stuff in those open spaces or leaving those Wi-Fi free?
So most likely from a vendor perspective, they're really going to be able to deliver Wi-Fi into areas that are developed.
Yep.
If not, then they would have to develop those areas. And when we're asking for a free Wi-Fi offering, it is going to be difficult to try to compel them to develop it, or it would require things like street lamps to be installed prior to it. So most likely what we're going to find is that those Wi-Fi offerings are going to be in areas that have things like power street lights.
Cool. Oh, and so that raises another question I forgot. What's the public vetting process going to be for the fiber huts, utility boxes, and stuff like that?
So take, for example, a park. If a park property were being requested to be used, it has to go through the Recreation and Parks Commissioners. All items are going to go through the Digital Infrastructure Permitting Group. So where we may be expediting the permitting process, we're not bypassing the permitting process. So it'll all be reviewed and approved before any of these structures would be built.
A number of folks in LA for a number of years have been trying to win approval of an above-ground facilities ordinance, which, even though we can't deny a location based on health considerations, would allow us to apply some aesthetic and design requirements. I understand that's coming down the line. Is that something, if we do that, would those requirements, would this also be subject to those requirements?
I think our intent is to facilitate the discussion with council and identify our ability to incorporate into these requirements.
I'm not sure what you mean by that. Is that
Yes. Co-house the infrastructure.
Yes.
okay? That answer was so much easier to understand.
I like to have easy answers.
Thanks for the translation,
Yes.
Mark. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that's an important point, Mike, because I think aren't we getting 7,500 new utility boxes citywide in the coming years?
So if there's an existing vendor and they already have existing utility boxes, we wouldn't see that impact. But you're right. A vendor could be providing a proposal in which there would be up to 70 fiber hubs and let's say 7,000 utility boxes associated with their proposal.
So if
Be able to
there's a
support
way to cohabitate all that technology into one utility box as opposed to just having them pop up everywhere.
Correct, or improve the aesthetics of a utility box if we agreed to it.
Thank
I would
you.
agree.
Okay, so I also want to thank our chair for his incredible leadership on this, because it seems like from the very first meeting we had here in this committee, you've been talking about universal accessible Wi-Fi across the city. And, seeing as this is the information age, we're leaving entire segments of society behind. And I don't think we can underestimate enough what a disadvantage that means for neighborhoods that are really disadvantaged already. And so I think this is a real giant step in, adding that new rung on the ladder to give people a leg up who otherwise just are not going to have it. So I think maybe this is the one big initiative that people aren't talking about yet, but will potentially make the largest impact of almost anything we do.
Councilman, I have
So-
a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old at home, and I am amazed at the amount of work that they're doing online for their schooling.
It's amazing, and the things that you can learn, it's kind of like libraries when I was growing up, how it opens up a whole new world. We have entire neighborhoods that have no world, they have no access to that world, and
Correct.
it's tragic. So I'm all on board to making this happen. Thank you. I have a few questions as well. I know the RFP seeks for proposals that do a lot of things, and one of them is to provide access to city park property for placement of the infrastructure. I know right now we have that trial project. We have 6 parks, I think, that have Wi-Fi currently, and Echo Park Lake is one of them, and it's terrific. So do you envision that Wi-Fi will be available across the whole city in most, if not all, of our city parks?
One of the items that's explicitly stated in the RFP is parks are an area of high dense population. It's a great opportunity for them to deliver it. So we have the specific item requested in there for parks to be able to install Wi-Fi devices there to be able to deliver it to the park community. So that is an item that's highlighted. As well as it's worth noting that when it comes to fiber hut locations, we have a variety of other properties to be able to offer. So it's in our ideal world, we'd be seeing simply the Wi-Fi devices and not the fiber hubs infringing on any park property.
Terrific. I think that's really important. We're so park poor in so many of our neighborhoods. It's going to be critical. One thing that concerns me is the street damage restoration fee extension from 1 year to 3. I think that based on a handful of personal experiences I've had in my district, both when I was a deputy and since being council member, is that oftentimes this 1-year moratorium can be problematic. It's a great thing because why resurface a street and then tear it up the next day to trench and do something new? But from a business perspective, I can give you an example, and I won't name the business, but it was in my district, and they pulled a permit because they needed to run a DWP conduit under a major boulevard, and they were told they couldn't because it was about to be resurfaced, and if they did, they would have to pay, and it was, no kidding, $1 million, because they would then be responsible for resurfacing the entire street unless they wanted to wait 1 year. I had to intervene, get street services to stop and not pave it for, I think I delayed it for about a month, and we got DWP to do it in emergency. Yeah, we'll do the trenching and we'll get it done. But that's just one example of the potential challenge, I think, to our business community, and that's just businesses, not to mention, other construction projects, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that we need to take a look at some sort of arrangement in case maybe some sort of category of urgent need. It's one of those unintended consequence issues that I see with this. What are your thoughts on that?
We're a large, complex city, and so here we're discussing a broadband initiative to try to deliver broadband access, where we're also having discussions on the condition of our streets and improving them.
Right.
So ultimately what we push for is coordination to not impact the street damage. Being someone who just had cable installed on my residence right in front of my house, I'm all too familiar with what the effect of that is. So the intent is to be able to facilitate that, and there are discussions that would be going forward to the Public Works Committee also in Council in regards to the street damage restoration process, as well as how CityLink would integrate with it and if exceptions would be available associated with it.
Yeah, I would almost want some sort of hardship clause in there to be considered with great scrutiny, because we wouldn't want this to happen all over the place. But I think it's one of those situations where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing always. And especially when you're talking about public infrastructure improvements, they don't necessarily know that an application was just pulled at the planning counter.
Correct.
Right? So it's a very complicated relationship, but I think it's going to be really important to, for the most part, our business community. We don't want to hinder that. So
coordination through Public Works makes perfect sense regarding this. I think another item worth mentioning is through our review of the city, about 70% or so of the city could actually have infrastructure built in the overhanging wires. Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't actually have street digs in those areas. So we'd be discussing about 30% of the city which could possibly be impacted.
Okay.
And I should add, working with Public Works Committee and this proposal, they've already, as a committee, they did something to exempt major telecom projects pending full council approval. So that's moving forward, and I think we'll move forward with this proposal when it comes tomorrow.
Just keep in mind, sometimes it's just a business that needs a new conduit, but they have to trench from across the street in order to open or expand and hire people.
Correct.
So I definitely want some sort of exception for those types of dynamics that pop up unexpectedly, usually.
But anything associated with this project would be, even if it's for a small business, getting that would be considered part of this major telecom project. Because this is, if you're part of CityLink LA, you're part of a major telecom project. If you're a small business opening up, you're going to get that access. That's how I understand it, but I would be corrected if I'm wrong on that by our experts here.
Correct.
Terrific. Thank you again. Bob, thanks. Just, great leadership on this. Thank you.
Thank you. A couple other questions. The digital divide, we've been talking about it, but I want to give you an opportunity. What are the different ways in this proposal that we're talking about bridging that digital divide in terms of vision, the ideal?
Well, there's certainly a few. We're ensuring that neighborhoods that have been previously underserved would be getting service and the same quality of service as all the other communities. We're also ensuring commitments to things like net neutrality. We're looking at having a basic level of broadband that would be no cost. So that is something that would be available for those who, let's say, wouldn't be able to afford broadband. And I think another very powerful aspect is the Wi-Fi component. We've had discussions with council members and others that sometimes part of the digital divide is simply maybe the lack of understanding or the lack of interest in having that wired connection to a router that's sitting in the home. But just about everybody's familiar with how to jump on Wi-Fi. And so that is something that would also help bridge and make it easier for different communities to be able to access the good internet.
Great. Well, I'm excited about that. So what are the next steps for CityLink LA? Assuming the council approves the release of the RFP tomorrow, walk us through what happens after tomorrow.
Certainly. So the RFP would technically release on June 23rd with small updates to things like the site list and other discussions and Department of Water and Power details, et cetera. We'd have a proposer conference on July 16th. We'd have a period of follow-up questions and discussions for the submissions. We'd have submissions due November 12th, and we'd estimate up to a 5-year build-out after contract negotiations.
Great. Any additional questions, colleagues? Exciting. Great. We have this. Great. Thank you both for that wonderful presentation and answering our questions. And we have a public comment card from Emily Sokolsky with the Writers Guild. Emily, are you here? Yep.
Here. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Emily Sokolsky, and I'm a policy analyst with the Writers Guild of America West. I'm here today to speak on behalf of the Guild in support of CityLink LA and the RFP currently before your committee. The Writers Guild is a labor organization representing 8,000 professional writers, 3,600 of whom live in the city of LA, where WGA is headquartered. Our members are the creators of feature films, television series, and increasingly online video content, such as Amazon's Transparent and Hulu's East Los High, both of which were filmed locally. Affordable high-speed broadband service is necessary for Los Angeles to maintain its role as the entertainment capital for the next generation of content creators. For our members and many others who work in the entertainment industry, the internet has introduced new creative and economic opportunities, making space for diverse and independent programming. After decades of consolidation among networks, studios, and distributors, the internet has enabled new competition from online video services like Netflix and Amazon, both of which are making significant investment in original programming. A fast, affordable, and open connection between consumers and edge providers is necessary to continue this progress. And with the latest wave of consolidation in the distribution industry, first with Comcast Time Warner Cable, then AT&T DirecTV, and most recently with Charter's proposed acquisition of Time Warner Cable, it's critical that our city take control of its broadband future. That's why the Guild supports this plan, and especially the following provisions of the RFP. Standalone gigabit broadband service offered at or around a $70 price point. Free Wi-Fi delivered at a minimum speed of 5 megabits per second. Equitable network deployment so that high-speed broadband is available to all residents, regardless of income or neighborhood. And finally, the city's commitment to and continued leadership on net neutrality. This is especially critical because internet service providers have already begun to challenge the FCC's open internet rules, and the city must make sure that CityLink LA adheres to net neutrality principles. I'm sorry.
No, you're perfect timing. You can finish your sentence if you.
Oh, thank you.
All right.
I had more. I wasn't watching the clock, though.
It's okay.
Thank you.
We very much appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
And without objection, we're going to pass this item. Pass number 1.
No objection.
Great. Mr. Villanueva, anything else pending before the committee?
There's none, sir.
Great. Then this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Congrats. Nicely done.